I'm Kelly Jennings, CEO of PowerBand Solutions. PowerBand is a cloud-based provider of auction, inventory, and finance solutions that make buying, selling, and financing vehicles more efficient. PowerBand Solutions trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol PBX and on the OTCQB symbol PWWPF and on Frankfurt symbol 1ZV. For more information, please visit us at powerbandsolutions.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, author of The Corbett Report. He's speaking to us from Japan. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you very much for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
James, you have come up with what you call the real fake news. So what was your number one real fake news story?
That's right. I just released an episode of my podcast, the second annual Real Fake News Awards, which spins off from the Real Fake News Awards, which I started back in 2018, because people might remember at the beginning of 2018, the Republican Party in the United States launched their Fake News Awards. So you had Donald Trump announcing the Fake News Awards, which of course were all about fake news about the Republicans and the Trump administration. I thought, that's a great idea, but I'm not a party partisan, I'm not American, and I don't care about party politics. I want to talk about real fake news. So I started the Real Fake News Awards, and they cover all sorts of different subjects. So the first one that I covered this year was this fake Russian hysteria scare, specifically with regards to the Skripal affair. People might remember the Russian poison story that made a lot of sensational headlines back last April, talking about the Skripals, this father and daughter who were poisoned in Salisbury in England, and people probably have picked up different parts of this from the story. It didn't obviously get a lot of press coverage in England, but all over the world, really, in the weeks following. It was a very sensational story. This spy who had turned against the Russians and been exchanged in this, intelligence exchange, and had been living in exile, essentially, in England for over a decade, being poisoned by Russian spies. It was this really dramatic story that turns out to have more twists and turns than a road pass through the Rocky Mountains. It's absolutely crazy when you start looking at all the different things that have happened in the course of the several months that this story has played out in the media. And I point to some of them in my Real Fake News broadcast, including just bizarre tidbits that came out about how one of the main BBC reporters who was covering the story turned out several months later to say, actually, I was in heavy, close contact with the Skripals right before all of this started, because I was writing a book about them, but I didn't tell anyone at the time, but here's the book. And it turns out that his connection was through the Skripals' MI6 handler, because, of course, this Skripal, who was a Russian spy, was also being handled by MI6, the British intelligence agency, and his handler was in the tank regiment of this BBC reporter. I could go on and on and on just explaining all these different details that have come out over the past year about this story, but for the long story short, I hope people will just check out the work of Craig Murray. He's a former British ambassador who has been covering the twists and turns in this story that just get crazier and crazier. But long story short, whatever kind of bite-sized headline you heard about this Russian poison story is not the full story. There's much more going on here, and it's really quite bizarre.
So who did the poisoning?
Excellent question. And I don't think that there is a good answer to that yet. Because of all of the different twists and turns that this story has taken, including the idea that the latest working hypothesis is that basically this highly, extremely deadly Novichok poison, which of course is a Soviet Union developed super extra nerve agent that it was developed by the Soviets in the 1970s, 1980s, I want to say. So clearly it's from the Russians, right? Well, actually, Novichok is now, the details of how to make it have been widely available for decades now, and it's been produced in many different places. So the fact that it is of Soviet origin actually means nothing. But secondly, supposedly they're now saying it was applied to the door knob of the Skripals and the apartment that they were staying in, and so they must have touched the doorknob and then gotten sick. That story starts to fall apart because the two Russians that have yet to be identified that they've caught on CCTV around Salisbury actually turned out not to have not to be caught on the CCTV cameras that show the Skripals leaving their apartment and blah, blah, blah. The times don't match up. Again, I could go on and on explaining the details of this. But long story short, the two people that are being fingered by the Metropolitan Police in this investigation cannot be placed at the crime scene and cannot be placed with the supposed murder weapon. So we kind of have that investigation falling apart as it is. And then you also have these little details about the perfume bottle that was discovered by this couple that in Salisbury, and it goes on and on. But the other interesting part of the story that very seldom gets mentioned is that Salisbury in England, where this happened, is just a stone's throw away from Pordendown. And Pordendown just happens to be what Wikipedia would call a science park, but that's apparently code word for a military bioweapons laboratory in the United Kingdom, where they house all sorts of different bioweapons like anthrax and other strains, and who knows, maybe some Novichok. I mean, it's at least interesting that also, as it now turns out, and they're finally admitting, the first responder who responded to the medical emergency of the Skripals when they were found in the park, keeled over, just happened to be a chief army nurse from Pordendown. So there's a lot more going on in this story, and the fact that this supposedly Russian nerve agent really has not been any way or in any sense been tied to Russia seems to provide a little pause for thought for the media that just dutifully reports that this is a Russian poisoning.
Theresa May a little quick to jump on the Russians about it?
Of course, because of course that's politically popular, and it's very much in line with the sort of overarching narrative right now that we're in Cold War 2.0, and I guess Putin is the devil, and anyone who doesn't hate the Russians is clearly a Russian agent. So of course, I mean, myself and many other people have been accused of being Russian agents because we don't go along with the Russian boogeyman story that's being propounded right now. But people who do, like Theresa May, of course, will get patted on the head by the media. People who don't go along with it, like Jeremy Corbett, of course, the leader of the opposition there in the UK, who had the nerve, the effrontery to say, well, maybe we should wait for some evidence before we come to conclusions about who did this, was immediately castigated as a Russian accomplice or dupe or patsy or whatever, toady, whatever word is in vogue these days for basically the new neo-McCarthyite scare.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp, MGI and the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected several high-grade gold intersections, including 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. Additional drill targets on the LH property have been identified by a 2018 drone airborne magnetic survey to further evaluate a pyrrhotite-enriched gold-bearing system. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, number 2 on your fake news list of this year. Or the past year.
Number 2, number 2 is a fake climate scare story, which goes to nature.com, which published the incredibly grabby headline, Quantification of Ocean Heat Uptake from Changes in Atmospheric O2 and CO2 Composition, which I'm sure just rolls off the tongue and everyone is familiar. Oh, wait, no, of course. No one in the general public has probably heard of or read that paper in and of itself, but they have definitely seen the scaremongering headlines that paper launched, including ones from the Washington Post and CNN and a million other outlets, basically talking about how the oceans are heating up faster than expected, or new research finds large buildup of heat in oceans suggesting a faster rate of global warming, or oceans trapping 60% more heat than originally thought. Those types of headlines definitely made the rounds as soon as this article was published in Nature in October of last year. The little problem is, just a couple weeks later, they had to add a little asterisk to the article to say that, editor's note, we'd like to alert readers that the authors have informed us of errors in the paper. An implication of the errors is that the uncertainties in ocean heat content are substantially underestimated. We're working with the authors to establish the quantitative impact of the errors on the published results, at which point in time we will provide a further update. Translation into ordinary English, there was a basic mathematical error on page 1 of this study that apparently none of the reviewers, none of the editors, no one who looked at this, none of the researchers themselves, no one picked up on at all during any part of the publication process. It gets published, launches all the scaremongering headlines. A week or two later, a scientist who isn't quite on board with the hysteria that goes around in these circles, Nick Lewis, posted a little correction to say, hey, there's something wrong with this study. I don't know if you noticed, but the math is completely wrong. And that was published on the website of Judith Curry, who's been a guest on my program before. She's a climate, I guess she would be labeled a climate heretic. I believe she was literally called that because she was recognized as one of the leading scholars and researchers about the impacts of hurricanes and climate change induced, how climate change is affecting hurricanes and that sort of thing. But several years ago, she started noticing that the groupthink surrounding climate change was getting to the point of being dogmatic rather than scientific, and her just taking one toe outside over the line and saying, well, maybe the critics of this science actually have some points here, got her castigated as a heretic. So now she runs this website, Climate Etc., where it includes dissenting voices from the scientific community, like Nick Lewis, who published this correction and said, well, look, there's this basic mathematical error on page 1 that you don't even need a calculator to see there's something wrong here. I mean, they're doing a least squares linear trend fit of a line on a graph, so you can't exactly do it in your head. But you can see that the trend that they're trying to say in this data is completely wrong, that it should be under 1, and they estimate it as being over 1. Well, you go and you do the math and you find out, yep, they did a basic mathematical error. Again, on the first page, they completely undermines the entire point of the study. The entire point of the study is, while we've vastly underestimated the amount of heat in the oceans, thus global warming is worse than we thought. We're all going to fry. We're all dying. And of course, those are the screaming headlines that the mainstream media ran with. And so the paper is essentially I would like to say it's been retracted, but as I just read you that editor's note, it hasn't been retracted, really. They're just saying, we'd like to alert the readers that the authors have informed us of errors in the paper, which is an incredibly mealy-mouthed way of saying we failed to catch a basic mathematical error on page 1 of this paper. Sorry about that, guys. And they say they're working to establish the quantitative impact of the errors on the published results, and they'll update it at a subsequent time. Well, no update yet, and it's been 3 months and counting now. So it seems likely that they're just going to try to brush this under the rug. Oh yeah, okay, I guess, we were kind of wrong about that, but let's never talk about it again. And as a result, of course, as you can imagine, all of the headlines promoting this story were sensational, grabby headlines about the oceans are heating up faster than expected, and we have less time than we thought with regard to climate change. The retraction headlines or in the mainstream media were not quite so catchy. And I highlight one in that in the Real News Awards, something to the effect of climate change concerns over report on ocean heating. So those are the ways that they'll kind of bury the news that story that we were warning you about a couple of weeks ago is completely false. And that's why I think these fake news awards are important, is because the tendency is for the fake stories to get swept under the rug, because of course the mainstream media isn't going to tout the fact that they were fooled so easily.
Well, Michael Rivero pointed out they changed the way that they calculate the ocean's temperature, because now they're measuring engine cooling intakes with the water that they bring in, Well, you can see how just the heat of the ship itself, or if there's an engine nearby, could change that temperature rather dramatically. So if you switch from just dipping a bucket in the ocean or dropping, thermometers in the ocean to having it on board a ship and measuring it, how that could affect it.
Absolutely correct. There are many different problems with regards to the global temperature record, and I've talked about them at length on my site before. I have a video called What is the Average Global Temperature, just talking about the concept of average global temperature and how we arrive at that, what data sets are used, how those data sets are constructed, because, again, it is not just a question of looking at a thermometer, it's a question of constructing a data set from a lot of different data points, and how do you come up with the best idea for an average global temperature, which includes, of course, vast areas of oceans, which, again, how do you sample the temperature of the ocean? It's an incredibly difficult task to even comprehend how to begin approaching it, let alone how to actually do it. And then on top of that, the very sparse data sets for vast swaths of land. It's a real question about how these numbers are arrived at and what they mean, and whether the fact that the one data temperature set shows a 1/10 of a degree Celsius rise over the past year, whether that really justifies the kind of headlines that we get, the hottest year ever, that we get every single year because of this or that. And that's even if we are to trust these data sets. Whereas I've also shown how there is absolutely 100% documentable tampering going on with data temperature sets as well, which we have to add to this, which makes the entire thing almost, it would be funny if it was not so serious. In fact, that's, I think, one of the things you'll take away if you do go and see this real fake news awards. It is kind of funny. I mean, the point is to mock the insanity of some of this propaganda that we're fed and asked to believe wholesale. But again, unfortunately, it's extremely important, and this is really, in some cases, life and death type of issues that we can't just ignore, and we can't allow the media to continue to mislead the public on such colossally important stories.
Also, when it comes to gathering temperatures, most official weather stations are at the airport. Well, back in the 20s and 30s, your airport was nothing but a grassy field. Now it's surrounded by concrete, asphalt, and high-rise buildings that are heat traps. So,
That's exactly right. The urban heat island effect is a very important part of this, yes. And it's been studied at length by people like, I believe it's Anthony Watts at What's Up With That, who's done extensive research on this and talked about it. And there's many examples, and you can go and look these up, where you can see the temperature measuring device that they have at the airport is literally at the end of the runway on the tarmac, being exposed to jet engines as they're coming and going. It's absolutely insanity that this is the official temperature record, but that's where it comes from.
Yes, and what I hate are major media organizations, say take a CNN, quoting the Washington Post or the Los Angeles Times, some other media outlet. Well, what's wrong with you going out and exploring to see if this story is really true instead of just quoting somebody else? I know there's been major cutbacks in media organizations, but surely, I mean, I always had a rule. You don't accept what you've heard elsewhere. You go and confirm it yourself. Why don't they do that?
Yeah, I think you hit on an extremely important point, and you're right. To a certain extent, it is, I won't say justified, but it is at least explained by the precipitous decline in funding for a lot of these news outlets to do actual news reporting. In the age of the internet, where, of course, the grabbiest headline, the most sensational sort of story, will get the most clicks and thereby the most advertising revenue and thereby earn the most money. And we've seen how that has essentially been weaponized by outlets like BuzzFeed and a million others that get popular off of these viral hits that they have through their quote-unquote reporting, which is essentially just repeating, as you say, of other people's stories in a more sensational form with a more grabby headline. And that is a race to the bottom. That is a structural problem with the way that the media is functioning in this new online environment. But it does go, I think, also to the deeper problem of propaganda in general. And what does it mean that news organizations are being paid for their operations through advertising for corporate sponsors? Do corporate sponsors affect what gets reported and how it gets reported? Of course it does. Everyone knows that. So that's another aspect of this. When all the funding is coming from a few corporate players who have important points in different industries, you can bet that the deep and profound reporting on those industries isn't going to happen in the first place. And then that's compounded by the online media environment and the way the race to the bottom is taking place.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. Work programs are underway in Finland and Canada. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol ADD, on Frankfurt symbol 82A1, and the OTCQB symbol ASDZF. Please visit our website arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, what else has made your second annual Fake News Awards?
Well, my fake Pentagon budget story of the year award goes to the New York Times. It sounds like a very specific category, and that's because it is. But this is about a story the New York Times had called "The Misleading Claim That $21 Trillion in Misspent Pentagon Funds Could Pay for Medicare for All," which the outlet to this, basically this is a fact-check type of story about a story that made the rounds briefly on social media when the new superstar member of Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, tweeted about the $21 trillion of Pentagon financial transactions that could not be traced, documented, or explained. And she leapt from that to say, well, $21 trillion in Pentagon accounting errors, that could almost completely cover Medicare for all, which would cost about $32 trillion. So basically she's saying we could have, Medicare for everyone in the United States if the Pentagon just got their books in order. And the New York Times is taking the position, well, let's fact check this tweet and see if that's really true. And they say, well, look, and $21 trillion isn't really missing. I mean, the entire Pentagon budget from 1998 to 2015 was $9.2 trillion. So, how could $21 trillion go missing? And that was essentially their fact check. Well, that grossly misrepresents the story. And I should know because I just recently talked to one of the main researchers behind this story about the $21 trillion that the Pentagon cannot track. That isn't fake news. That's even acknowledged by the New York Times. That there are $21 trillion in transactions that the Pentagon cannot track and they do not have details for, or will not provide details for, perhaps more to the point. That is documented, and it's been actually a scandal that started in the late 1990s and continued, as people might have heard by now. On September 10th, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld, who was then, of course, Secretary of Defense under the Bush administration, held a press conference at the Pentagon saying that the Pentagon is launching a new war on bureaucracy, because we can't account for, at that time, it was $2.1 trillion in transactions. And of course, that story, which one would think would be the headline news for at least a week or two, got kind of buried by the next day when, of course, 9/11 happened. So that was an interesting part along this story. But now, fast forward nearly 2 decades, and it's now $21 trillion when you add up all of the incredible reports that have come out from the Office of Inspector General about all of these transactions that can't be added up. So I actually talked to one of the main researchers who's been digging into this story a couple of months ago now on my website. His name is Dr. Mark Skidmore. And we had this lengthy conversation about what does this mean? What $21 trillion in unaccounted transactions. So where does this come from? How do we know this? What do these numbers mean? Can this actually be $21 trillion in missing money, or is this just plugs that they're plugging into the books to make things balance out, as the Pentagon likes to try to frame it, or what's happening? We had a lengthy discussion, but long story short, Dr. Skidmore says, well, we can't tell anything at all given the information that they fed to the public about this. We can't tell if it's been actually $21 trillion in funds that have flowed through these books in some way, in some real sense, or whether it's less than that, or whether it's more than that. We really can't tell at all because of how opaque these stories are, and the way that it's being reported, and what is being dribbled out to the public through the Office of Inspector General. And it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's completely incomprehensible from any accounting point of view, even taking into account what the Pentagon has been saying for the last 2 decades as to why they cannot do the budget that they are legally mandated to do and have been for decades. They keep saying, oh, we have legacy accounting systems that don't talk to each other, and we have to balance books that where there's duplicate entries and things like this. And that's basically been their excuse for going on 2 decades now. Dr. Skidmore undermines that in our conversation, and we get into the details of that. Long story short, the New York Times is wrong for saying that this is a misleading claim about the $21 trillion, at least insofar as they say that it can't possibly be $21 trillion in money. Well, the actual researcher at the University of Michigan, who has been doing this research, says not only could it be actually $21 trillion in missing funds, it could be much more than that. We really don't know.
James, anything else on the fake news list?
Well, yes, I did cover the story that might have slipped off the radar for a lot of people. Arkady Babchenko, who was a critic of the Kremlin, who was shot dead in Ukraine, according to reports from CNN and many, many other outlets. But strangely enough, the next day there was a press conference where he turned up very much alive and well and said, yeah, psych, yeah, I faked my own death, and the Ukrainian intelligence service was in on it. But we were basically faking my death to foil a murder plot against me by the Kremlin or something like that. It's such a bizarre story, but it's extremely telling in the way that fake news can be reported absolutely 100% credulously by the media that will, as you say, just report things that other people are reporting without checking into it for themselves. So they were caught with their egg on their face. And on that one, which is why most people probably do not remember the name of Arkady Babchenko, because they swept that story under the rug very quickly. I gave a Fake Reporter of the Year award to Der Spiegel, and Klaus Relotius, who was a German reporter who had won numerous reporting prizes for his completely made up stories, including stories about people that didn't exist and things that didn't happen. It's all come crashing down in the last last couple of months, as people might have read. But you can't make this up. He actually did receive a CNN Journalist of the Year award for his, now, as we now know, completely fake reporting that has now been retracted. So that, again, speaks volumes about the media and the way it works. And for the fake story of the year, the number one fake news story of the year, well, maybe I'll leave it to your listeners to go and actually watch the Fake News Awards so that they can enjoy that report in all of its glory. That's CorbettReport.com. That's CORBETT report.com.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you very much for having me on today.
My guest was James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. If you have any questions for James or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.